The story begins with someone asking if you'd like to hear a funny story. He mentions that there are various armed groups around the world, while there is one thing that all of them feared. A man named Peter appears sitting, resting on several corpses. Our protagonist says that the most impressive part wasn't that, but rather that Peter is a 60-year-old man. In a confrontation between criminals, one of the survivors mentions that he could have died as a legend if he had died before being hunted by various assassins. The survivor discusses this with a man wearing a mocking mask, saying that he is being threatened by assassins from the organization. At this point, he wonders if the masked man could be Peter, as he sees the man standing surrounded by the corpses of his pursuers. Despite recognizing Peter, the survivor mentions that he would still be pursued by millions of other assassins, and all this effort made no sense. He says that even being the legendary Peter wouldn't save him forever, as he wonders how Peter was never discovered, until Peter asks if he wants to know the answer. Our protagonist approaches the survivor while saying that even with so many pursuers, he would never be found. After approaching the survivor, he begins to remove his mask while explaining what happened. At this moment, the survivor is impressed with what is revealed to him. After discovering Peter's secret, he is killed while wondering if he really is Peter. With that, we go back to 3 months earlier. In a bookstore, an elderly man is putting up a promotion notice while someone tells him he shouldn't continue working. This person orders him to stop ignoring the calls and go visit the hospital. Otherwise, he would die in 3 months, while the old man looks at the various medicines he needs to take. However, the old man says he doesn't fear death because he's already been on the brink of life and death several times. That's because he dedicated himself to the assassin organization for 50 years and has no regrets. At that moment, he looks at a photo book, thinking that he never took a picture of himself in his life. As he reorganizes things, a girl enters the bookstore wearing a school uniform. The girl says she was looking for elementary school textbooks. With that, the old man turns with a smile to her, saying that his old bookstore has books of all kinds. She asks if he would have used books, and the old man mentions that he had books from the 60s to the most recent ones, asking if she wants the most recent. At this, the girl says the book would be for her brother. Our protagonist looks at the shelf, asking if she's a high school student, and she confirms. The old man says she must be in the 3rd year based on her badge, and she is impressed that he knows so much. At that moment, the girl looks up at the table and sees the books she was looking for all wrapped up. Even though she says she wouldn't be able to pay for all the books, the old man mentions that she could keep them all. After unwrapping the books, he mentions that at least the books could be used instead of gathering dust. The girl tries to refuse, and the old man mentions that he could see how much she loves her brother, asking her to be good to him while she can. Otherwise, she might regret it in the future. After accepting his request, the girl asks if he ever regretted anything while he was arranging the books. At this, the old man becomes thoughtful, saying that the longer one lives, the more regrets they have. But he knows there's nothing that can be done, as he remembers a girl being taken away with someone saying it was the only way they could survive. The old man mentions that there's nothing one can do about the things they regret. He mentions that even though she might not understand what he's talking about, she should take care of her brother so as not to regret it later. With that, the old man tells her to leave, saying he wouldn't kill her if she left and ignored trying to kill him. At that moment, the girl realizes that he knew about her plans from the beginning. Our protagonist mentions that he had already memorized the faces of all the students and confirmed it when he asked if she was in the 3rd year, because the school in that neighborhood only went up to the 2nd year, making her understand that she was following his plan from the start. The old man also mentions that she couldn't hide the smell of blood on the knife by using any perfume, since he had smelled that scent his entire life. Seeing that her plan was compromised, she insists on trying to kill him, even knowing that he was aware of it from the beginning. But at that moment, she hesitates, realizing that even though she is the one arm, she feels that this would end with her dying. At that moment, the old man has a firm look that surprises her until he shows that he has arranged the books she had requested. Our protagonist turns back, saying that he had noticed that the part about her brother was true, and asks her to take the books. He mentions that he has done this for so long that he recognizes things just by looking. With that, he mentions that the girl is from the Glory Orphanage, just like he was, and that she hasn't learned anything despite having the same teaching method from his time. He mentions that in this organization, they have a response in case the mission fails. With that, he leaps towards the girl, saying that the response would be for Plan B to come into action. The old man grabs the girl by the neck while pushing her, confused about this idea of Plan B. At that moment, she looks up and sees 2 assassins emerging to kill her. Peter stays in front of her to protect her from the assassin's gunfire. He explains that Plan B would be to neutralize the agent sent along with the target. The girl then watches Peter, noticing that he has been shot in the stomach while protecting her. But they are still being targeted by the assassins, and Peter continues to protect her. With that, Peter stands up armed, trying to take down the 2 until he notices that they have taken the girl hostage. Because of this, Peter hesitates, being struck by the other assassin with a direct punch to the face. The assassin begins mocking Peter for being defeated so easily. At that moment, a 3rd assassin appears, explaining that despite Peter's feats and reputation, he needed to do this. This assassin was the informant of the boss known as Octopus, saying that not even the legendary Peter could remain incredible while being sick. Peter gets angry and asks why they are trying to kill him. He replies that the boss was upset with Peter, who is confused. Octopus explains that after Peter retired, thousands of people would come after him. That's because a bounty of 76 billion won was placed on his head. Our protagonist recognizes that this was the amount he had accumulated in his life, and the informant confirms it was the same amount. Because the idea was that after his death, the accumulated money would go to whoever managed to kill him. Octopus then becomes obsessed with the idea of getting that money and asks for Peter to be killed by him. With that, the assassin who had hit him attacks again, telling him to die quietly. After a series of punches, he throws Peter into another room. Believing that he had been knocked out, the assassin gets disappointed that it ended so quickly. Octopus approaches to make sure, and at that moment, Peter gives him a gift. A flash grenade is thrown in front of the informant, who is surprised. As they flee, the assassins notice that he had planned to be thrown towards the back door. The informant mentions that he wouldn't get far while injured and orders them to find him, leaving the girl completely in disbelief with everything she just witnessed. Meanwhile, in a public park in the rain, Peter falls to the ground trying to stand up. Peter laments not being able to fight properly because of his age. At that moment, he begins to recall his life and realizes that everything was tied to the organization. He remembers his hard training to learn how to handle a knife and how to execute people. And while other boys were learning to use social media, he was learning to hack and wiretap. Or even his moments with a Russian spy suffering from frostbite and fighting a terrorist group to survive. Peter remembers that everything changed when the new boss took control because he complained that Peter didn't meet his expectations. All because of the illness that left him debilitated, leading the boss to believe that he needed to be discarded. Our protagonist acknowledges that he didn't desire praise or honor for the years he dedicated to the organization. He only hoped they wouldn't try to discard him this way. He can't accept dying like this and letting his money fall into their hands, because his money was meant to help his daughter until he falls to the ground bleeding. Meanwhile, in Octopus's hideout, the two assassins complain about losing the money due to Peter's death. One of them mentions that the high amount was because of his history, while the other says that it was irrelevant because nothing comes before money. The assassin stares at Peter's photo, thinking about killing him to get the money. At that moment, someone appears, saying that this was the first photo of him. At that moment, the two assassins turn around and see a man wearing Peter's clothes, but they recognize that it wasn't him because the man had black hair, while saying that it was the first photo taken of him. The man says he doesn't know what happened because when he woke up, he was like that. With that, the assassin grabs his shoulder, trying to push him out, saying that this is not a place for a student. Suddenly, the man grabs his wrist, saying that he knows everything and demands to be taken to Octopus. At that moment, they face each other and recognize that he is also in the same line of work as they are. But he says that when someone from the same industry shows up in their place, it should be killed. When the assassin tries to attack Peter, he easily grabs his fist. The assassin is impressed by Peter's strength in blocking his strike and recalls how easily Peter had defeated him before. Peter crushes the assassin's fist with his hand. While one of the assassins feels his hand being destroyed, the other tries to surprise him from behind with a knife. But Peter manages to counter and lands a series of punches that easily take down the assassin. After knocking him down, the first assassin grabs the knife, asking who sent him. With that, Peter begins to explain that assassins who master cutlery are third class, while those who master all weapons are second class, observing the surroundings. He then picks up an octopus, saying that first-class assassins can use anything as a weapon. The assassin is astonished at him trying to use an octopus for defense, but ignoring his comment, the assassin charges at Peter to attack him. Peter uses the octopus like a whip to disarm the assassin from a distance, shocking him. Then he uses the tentacles to strangle him. After that, he throws him against the pots and tosses him into a pot full of boiling liquid using the octopus. As he throws him into the pot, he ends up destroying it. The assassin lies on the ground, wondering who this man could be. Peter picks up the photo they took of him, remembering Octopus's comment about his bounty. He looks at the photo, wondering if that was the only photo they had of his face. He then mentions that he had become a younger version of himself when he opened his eyes after that attack. Our protagonist lights his cigarette and burns his photo, saying that the Peter they were looking for is already dead, while revealing his new, rejuvenated appearance. Meanwhile, Octopus is driving, complaining about having lost track of Peter. He comments to his subordinate that he needs to find Peter as soon as possible, despite believing that he won't last much longer due to the cancer, saying that he could surrender to them gently. At the same time, Peter opens the doors of the restaurant controlled by Octopus. But seeing that he wasn't there, Peter believes that this extended Octopus's life a little longer. After that, he heads to the subway station. The people around are curious about the strange man in the bathroom, because Peter had taken off his shirt and was staring at his reflection, amazed by his rejuvenation. Additionally, he notices that he has been cured of cancer and the gunshot wound he received in the confrontation with the assassins has disappeared. He finally understands that he has become younger, wondering if that could really happen. Even so, he knows that thanks to this, he will never be recognized because no one would be looking for him as such a young man. He realizes he needs to change his clothes to avoid drawing attention. With that, he overhears a conversation between two men about a job that paid 80 million won. It turns out they had swindled a guy who was looking for money for his mother's medicine, and the two mock the guy for not reading the contract properly. The two continue talking while smoking in a prohibited area, discussing the fancy clothes one of them is wearing. He mentions that these clothes are useful to motivate victims to sign without thinking twice when they see his wristwatch. Peter approaches them, telling them to put out their cigarettes because it's a no-smoking area. However, this irritates the men who complain, telling him he should use formalities with his elders. One of the men slaps Peter in the face, telling him to leave while he's still in a good mood. After that, Peter walks toward the bathroom door to avoid trouble with those two who laugh at him. But then he locks the door, wanting to end this quickly. At that moment, he goes back to the two men, who start complaining again about him bothering them. Our protagonist rolls up his sleeves, saying he will show them what happens to those who don't show respect for their elders in the East. The man who slapped Peter intends to deliver another slap to get rid of him quickly. But at that moment, Peter hits him with two precise strikes, knocking him down. His partner pulls out a knife and threatens Peter, saying that he doesn't know who they are. But Peter says he recognizes that knife and that the guy is holding it the wrong way. He explains that he would end up cutting his own fingers if he swings the knife like that. The man gets irritated, saying he wouldn't swing the knife while still pointing it at Peter. Our protagonist mentions that someone planning to stab wouldn't leave their arm out front while preparing to take him down. The guy charges at Peter, who dodges and disarms him in a quick move before landing a punch that takes him down. The man starts screaming in pain, and Peter tells him that he didn't stab him because if he had, he'd already be dead. With that, the man asks who he is, and Peter says that although he doesn't care about the business of those two, Peter squeezes his shoulder as he leans in to whisper that if he found out who Peter was, he'd have to kill him. After this scare, Peter warns that his pants won't be of much use as he notices the man wetting himself in fear. As he leaves the bathroom, he checks his phone and discovers that his 76 billion won has disappeared. Our protagonist walks through the station, irritated that they mess with his money, wearing the clothes of one of the criminals. Even so, he acknowledges that this is what his companions are really worth. On the way, he overhears a girl saying that she received a scholarship from the Glory Club. Peter then explains that he grew up in the Glory Orphanage, which was run by a religious organization. 50 years later, the orphanage turned into a cartel with influence in politics and the business world, using a front called the Glory Club. Peter mentions that this was the organization he was part of and that now he will go after it to destroy it with his own hands. Meanwhile, in a butcher shop, a criminal finds himself being threatened by someone coming to capture him. That person threatening him was Octopus, who said it wouldn't take much to defeat him since he wasn't Peter. The criminal taunts, saying they would die young if they relied solely on Peter, and Octopus asks who cares if someone dies young or not. Octopus orders to finish this quickly so it will be less painful for him. With that, the criminal starts laughing, thinking Octopus was showing off too much. He then reveals that he had called his companions from the Vacna mercenary company to solve the problem. That criminal knows that Octopus wasn't one of the 12 apostles of the Glory Club and doesn't understand why he was so confident. He then orders his subordinates to take down Octopus, and they all charge at him. Shortly after, the criminal is surrounded by blood and trembling in fear on the ground, seeing something absurd that didn't even seem human. Octopus says he found it very easy to deal with the subordinates he had brought, as he contorts his body in an inhuman manner, twisting the body of one of the subordinates using his hyperflexibility ability. After getting rid of the subordinates, he charges at the criminal, who becomes desperate. Back at his restaurant, Octopus learns about the attack Peter caused on his subordinates. He asks if there really wasn't any evidence left, and when it's confirmed, he believes there's only one person capable of doing that. Octopus mentions that Peter was behind it and imagines that he's starting to kill his men while the girl continues to follow him. But he remembers that the bounty on Peter would drop soon, and he should get rid of him as soon as possible. With that, he orders the girl to report as soon as they know Peter's whereabouts while she recalls everything she's been through with Peter. As they arrive at the restaurant hall, they see someone there and his subordinate says they were open. He asks if the man sitting there had made a reservation. The man says he didn't have a reservation, but a grudge. Octopus asks if it had something to do with money, and Peter mentions that it had to do with a large sum. With that, he mentions the amount of 76 billion, knowing it would affect him. At that moment, Octopus orders the doors to be locked and mentions that he wouldn't leave there alive for having some connection with Peter. But since Peter no longer looks the same, Octopus doesn't recognize him and wonders who he could be and what he's planning. He imagines if that man could be Peter's son or disciple and knows it couldn't be either of the two. Realizing he might get information from him, Octopus decides to give him two options. One of the options would be to tell where Peter was and be able to leave alive, while the other would be to stay silent and be killed by his subordinate. Our protagonist starts provoking him while eating the dish on the table, which irritates the informant. He mocks him, saying that no one has ever survived after hearing this. But then he says there could be a third option, revealing that he is Peter. Octopus stares at him, not understanding what Peter was saying. Peter continues to provoke him, saying that despite being so young, he heard very poorly and that it was he who killed his subordinates. Though Octopus understands that he killed his subordinates, he doesn't believe he is Peter and wonders why he did it. He then orders the protagonist to tell the truth, stating that the weapons were real and asks what his relationship with Peter was. After glancing at the girl behind Octopus, Peter decides there's no other option and decides to speak. He picks up the food, saying that Octopus just needs to kill him, which would make everything simpler for him. Octopus orders his subordinate to at least make sure he can still breathe, and the subordinate points his gun, confirming he heard the order. But at that moment, he is struck by something in the neck as he tries to fire. As he falls to the ground, the girl notices he has a chopstick in his neck. She realizes that he hit the man's vital point while the other chopstick was lodged in the gun barrel. She stares at him, thinking that he was the same age as her and that there was no one in the Glory Club or even in the country with such skill. Then Octopus gets quite excited, saying he liked the boy, thinking it was purely luck, and asks if he would like to join them. Suddenly, Octopus pulls out a pistol and unloads it in a fury against the boy. But Peter manages to protect himself using the table to shield from the bullets. The informant mocks him, saying that he was still too young, and asks if he didn't know that you can't protect yourself from bullets using a table. With that, Octopus approaches, reloading his weapon, asking again where Peter was and telling him to join them because it would be a shame if he died there. He gets close to the side of the table to finish Peter off once and for all. But then he notices that the guy is gone and that the red liquid spread around is just sauce. Octopus continues searching for the boy around the place to get rid of him. Little by little, he starts to lose patience, thinking that he couldn't be a ghost to have disappeared like that. Then he finds Peter hanging from a part of the pillar with his mouth full of something. Peter takes advantage of Octopus turning to him and spits all the sauce he had in his mouth directly at his face. With that, he strikes Octopus' arm to disrupt his aim. Right after that, Peter uses his other hand to dismantle his pistol. After disarming him, Peter begins to hit Octopus, who is unable to react. The informant notices that he was incredibly fast and wonders if he really was just a kid. Peter finishes his enemy by completely twisting his neck. Octopus is impressed by the boy's skills because he has never encountered anyone as skilled as him. At that moment, Octopus remembers his training, which mentioned a tactic of taking advantage of a moment when his opponent's guard was down. He recalls that at that moment, he created an ability that only he could use. His flexibility ability was very useful in training, where the trainers made him push harder each time to be able to kill his enemy. But he had already been warned that the most dangerous thing to do was to turn your back when you think you've won because you can't trust yourself too much. With this in mind, he was confident that he wouldn't lose to anyone. Suddenly, he grabs Peter's leg and wraps himself around it to immobilize him. After trapping him, Octopus begins to twist Peter's body. Octopus mentions that he has been in this business since the boy was born and that he has much more experience than a rookie like him. He then finishes Peter off until he hears someone asking how long he has been there. The informant looks up and sees Peter watching him while he was holding someone else. With that, he realizes he was contorting the body of his subordinate, who had already been killed. At that moment, Octopus recognizes that his time in this business was telling him that the boy was going to kill him. He understands that this boy might be even better than the 12 apostles of the Glory Club. Understanding this, Octopus cowers and asks to negotiate. He then grabs his subordinate and says he would hand her over because even though she has no experience in the field, she would still be useful. The girl tries to refuse while Octopus orders her to stay quiet because he was trying to negotiate with the boy. Peter agrees and Octopus is pleased, saying that he was a smart young man. With that resolved, the informant flees, saying he would pretend he didn't see anything and that Peter could do whatever he wanted with her while thinking about finding out more about the boy. But Peter mentions the do-or-die tactic that Octopus had recalled earlier. This triggers Octopus to remember his training and everything the boy had said, starting to piece things together. At that moment, he stares at the boy and notices that he emanates the same aura as Peter. Octopus remembers that no one who met Peter survived. Peter confirms what he said as he rushes toward Octopus. Gradually, all of Octopus's limbs and his neck are twisted by a swift movement from Peter. Meanwhile, the superiors receive confirmation of Octopus's death. They reveal that the cameras were removed before they could reach the scene and that there were no more pieces of evidence. The leader mocks the whole situation while doing one-arm push-ups on the rooftop of his building. He mentions that the 76 billion reward for this SSS-level mission will be sent to all the assassins of glory, because they were all authorized to hunt Peter. Back in the city, people walk around until a child points out an announcement on the external screens. This announcement catches Peter's attention, who notices it's an ad for meals for the elderly, using the only photo of him, and understands they are spreading information about him. He continues down the streets until he receives a flyer from Glory that gives more details about him. Peter figures they don't need to worry about finding him because he will be coming after them himself. Our protagonist realizes that he needs help to take down Glory, and only one person comes to mind. However, this person makes him quite uncomfortable. Meanwhile, in an abandoned and barricaded place, he arrives there and is struck by the sight of the place full of people sleeping on the floor, realizing that more and more people were ending up there. After dodging the sleeping homeless, he approaches a wall, searching for something among the organ sale and prostitution ads, until he finds a gap and, upon touching it, reveals a secret passage. Descending through the secret passage, he finds a luxurious place. Peter recognizes that the place has been restored, imagining it must have cost a lot of money. Then someone appears nearby, threatening him with a point close to his neck. He says that silk clothes and jade china weren't necessary for that person. That's because the person is a blind woman, holding her cane pointed at him while her guide dog stares at him irritably. The woman smiles, saying that even though things had been calm, it seemed like she would need to take care of some bodies. At that moment, she begins to smell him and notices that Peter doesn't smell of alcohol, indicating that he wasn't one of the vagabonds in the area. At the same time, she realizes that he had such a strong thirst for blood that he couldn't be just any thief. To protect herself, she tries to strike him with a cane, asking if he was sent by Glory while Peter dodges the blow. Even though she insists on trying to hit him, Peter continues to evade her attacks, at least until he's cornered against the wall, making her point the cane at him. The girl throws her cane, telling him to be careful because the wallpaper was expensive, and Peter dodges the attack again. He stares at the cane embedded in the wall, starting to think about something. Peter wonders if she's really blind because her skills are incredible, and she even praises herself, until he manages to stop her attack by grabbing her leg and flipping her upside down. Finally, he throws her onto the sofa to end the fight, but then she pulls out a knife, saying she didn't expect Glory to have someone as skilled as him. At that moment, she notices that he no longer had a thirst for blood. She mentions that although it wasn't pleasant to kill someone so skilled, someone had to die at that moment because it was part of their job. With that, she orders her dog, Alexander McKing, to attack him, and Peter notices the dog charging at him. However, McKing ends up being tamed by Peter, which impresses the girl. After they resolve everything and Peter explains what happened, she is astonished to notice that Peter has rejuvenated. The girl touches his face, noting that his skin is much smoother, and wonders if this is really possible. Suddenly, she throws herself on the floor along with McKing, leaving Peter confused. She asks if this was the position in which he had died, saying that she would like to try it too. At that moment, she approaches him again, saying that the method might be the key to the issue, asking what had killed him so she could try the same. After Peter playfully taps her on the forehead, he begins to explain his plan, causing her to question how he intends to confront Glory. Peter mentions that he plans to enter the Eye of the Storm, which leaves her quite confused. Our protagonist explains that he will take advantage of Glory's search for him to place them in the palm of his hand. To do this, he intends to become an assassin for the Glory Club. The girl becomes worried, and Peter acknowledges that it sounds crazy. But then she remembers that since he rejuvenated, no one recognizes him anymore. So while they're all searching for Peter, they'll actually be in the palm of his hand. This thought excites her, and she says that he's a terrifying man, to which Peter responds that she's even more so. However, the girl reminds him that it would be impossible to become a Glory assassin without having come from the Honor Orphanage. She mentions that even he came from that orphanage, while this young version of him is just an outsider who couldn't become a Glory assassin. But Peter says there is a way. The next day in a building, someone asks what he is seeing in front of him. A group of girls is impressed by the handsome new student who is there, trying to catch his attention. It turns out that Peter's plan is to become a student at the Divine Honor School, and thus he becomes the new hot student of the school. To maintain his cover, he uses the name Kim Sunmu, which the girls, mesmerized by him, even say is a very sexy name. At that moment, a girl approaches, inviting him to the auditorium, and when he responds, the girls are once again impressed by his beautiful voice. As he heads to the auditorium, one of the teachers asks which girl is his type until she is scolded by someone else. Our protagonist explains that although it looks like a normal school from the outside, it is actually a school for assassins, with students being discreetly taught in the assassins class. His goal is to enter that class and become an assassin while blending in with the students at the school. Upon arriving at the auditorium, he receives a message from the blind girl, reminding him that the class only accepts children from the orphanage and asking how he plans to get in. He mentions that there is a rare exception. The girl is astonished that he plans to go that far. Sung steps onto the stage and begins to introduce himself to everyone, leaving them impressed. His speech includes his hobbies and talents, and he concludes by saying that he wants to become an assassin. At that moment, everyone is shocked by his statement, including the blind girl and the dog. But this was the plan, because with his speech, Peter caught the attention of the assassins class, knowing that this would get him recruited by them. To calm the situation, he mentions that he wants to be an assassin who is also good at academics. This motivates the students who recorded the presentation to start mocking him. But then a guy appears, pushing a girl who was recording the presentation. A group of students gathers in front of the protagonist, who recognizes that his plan has worked. Then the guy who pushed the girl asks if he had seduced a girl named Yejin, leaving Peter confused. The guy starts crying while complaining about the protagonist. It's revealed that his name is Yang Yisul, and the girl he mentioned was his girlfriend for 22 days and the most adored girl in the school. But when Peter arrived, she started getting excited about him, and Yang says she was stolen by the newcomer. Yang decides to take revenge on him and charges at Peter while he tries to talk. That boy is known for having managed to conquer the entire Mapo district with his fists. But when Peter retaliates, Yang feels death approaching as the protagonist stares at him with a fixed gaze. He imagines he's about to be defeated, lamenting that he couldn't protect Yejin, even though he never actually tried to do so. But then Peter stops just before hitting his forehead and merely flicks it. With that, Yang falls unconscious, trembling after being defeated by Peter. The problem is that at that moment, a staff member arrives complaining about them fighting at school and holding a red card. He starts pulling Peter's cheek, asking what his father does for a living, and the protagonist responds that maybe he's dead. As Peter is taken away by the teacher, Yang keeps complaining about being held back, trying to come up with an excuse for his defeat. At that moment, the members of the Assassin's class wonder what they should do about Peter. The decision is to try to find out more about him because it could be fun. In doubt, they believe they could simply kill him. At the same time as the protagonist continues to be pulled by the teacher, the girls keep praising him, until Octopus's subordinate girl finds him and becomes worried about why he's there, imagining that Peter's plan is to take everyone down. The next day, the subordinate, named Unbeal, hears someone asking if they could sit next to her. She's startled to see the protagonist and asks what he's doing there, and Peter responds that he's been followed by the students and asks why she isolates herself. Unbeal says she's not hungry, even though she's taken an absurd amount of food, which surprises Peter. At that moment, she begins to remember their last encounter. Peter had told her to say that the old Peter was responsible for the deaths, and that by doing so, she could be saved. The girl worries, asking why he's come after her when she kept her promise, and Peter mentions that he wasn't coming after her. She complains that because of him, the company has been spying on her, asking if he knows how difficult it's been for her. Even though Peter says she should thank him since she's only alive because of him, Unbeal asserts that she survived on her own. But Peter mentions that she doesn't fully understand how terrifying this place can be, nor who he really is, while the girl asks what he could do. At that, the girl decides to leave while Peter asks for her help because neither of them knows anything. Peter says he's counting on her help, taking the opportunity to reveal that he knows her real name, which is Lee Yuna. But when she turns back to him, Peter is gone. A few days later, the school's athletic competition begins. During the event, we meet the school's running record holder, Jonathan, as he runs, imagining that it will be the day of his retirement. That's because Peter is surpassing him with great ease. After the race, Jonathan is crying next to Yang, while the protagonist is observed by a figure in the shadows. Sometime later, he goes for a vision test and shows he can see all the lines without much difficulty. Next is the home economics class, where they have to learn how to cut fruit elegantly. The teacher asks if he has ever cut fruit before, telling him to be careful with the knives. After preparing, he manages to create a huge apple rabbit, making the teacher believe it's so well done that it looks like it's breathing. At the same time, some students surround the teacher who scolded Peter, saying they won't clean up anything while recording the teacher's reaction. They ask what he could do besides lowering their grades and complaining, and the teacher tries to assert himself without any effect. The students mention that he could have his license suspended for emotional abuse due to his questioning. When he tries to assert himself again, the students get irritated with his words. At that moment, the group leader throws the teacher against the equipment behind him. He mentions that more frightening than lowering grades would be having his teaching license suspended or even being fired, and then his friend says they should post the video. At that moment, they see Peter approaching them with a cup in one hand, a trash can in the other. Our protagonist asks if they attack the teacher and tries to intimidate the three into staying out of the matter. Peter asks what will happen if he doesn't, and the leader spits on his clothes and starts laughing afterward. Seeing that the newcomer is staring at him seriously, the leader tells him to leave quietly, and Peter questions again what will happen if he doesn't obey. This irritates the group leader, who decides to go after him. But Peter easily dodges each blow he attempts, causing his friends to taunt him for not being able to hit the newcomer. As he wonders why he can't land a blow, Peter hits him with a kick that knocks him face first to the ground. Because of this, his friend decides to finish Peter off, approaching him from behind with a brick. However, the newcomer quickly moves and destroys the brick in his hand before he can even realize it. With that, the three apologize to Peter, and then to the teacher, for what they did. After that, they run off, telling him to wait because justice always prevails, and Peter emphasizes that's why he won. Our protagonist turns to the teacher, asking if he's okay, and the teacher tries to scold him. But pretending not to hear, Peter notices they forgot the phone they were using to record the teacher's humiliation. The teacher asks if he has always been like this as a student, until he tries to land a direct kick to Peter's head while he is distracted. Peter defends against the strike, showing that the teacher was right to suspect that he had something different. The teacher holds up the cup Peter had handed him, mentioning that even during the fight, Peter didn't spill a single drop of coffee. With that, he wonders where and why Peter learned these fighting skills. At that moment, Peter reveals that he seeks revenge but keeps hidden who the targets of his vengeance are. Explaining that he has lost everything he had accumulated, Peter says that he is just like the dead. The teacher asks if he plans to join the volunteer club while displaying a firmer and more imposing stance. This was all part of Peter's plan because he wanted Professor Li Guangyu to take an interest in him. Guangyu is the instructor for assassins from the Glory Club at that school. It turns out that at the school there's a volunteer club where students can potentially become glory assassins, and the teacher recognizes Peter's talent. With that, he takes Peter to the volunteer club room where glory assassins are promoted. Upon arriving in the room, Peter is surprised to find that it's just a room with a group of normal students who don't seem out of the ordinary. Guangyu goes to the front of the room and orders them to pay attention. When the teacher explains that Peter will be working with them, Yuna is once again impressed by his decision to join that club. She becomes worried as Peter stares at her, while he wishes she wouldn't say anything. To try and help her relax, Peter winks at her, and Yuna wonders why he did that, imagining she might be his next victim. Our protagonist introduces himself and thanks the group for having him, while noting that the room is too ordinary to be a place where assassins are trained. But then two students become irritated and try to intimidate him. They are Dako Hyung and Dako Jia, who question how an outsider could be admitted when only people from the Honor Orphanage are accepted into the club. As he recalls that even though he was a member of the orphanage, he couldn't mention it. The teacher suggests they have a simple welcome party. Two students ask if they should do the punch, which leaves Peter confused. What they're talking about is a club tradition called the Bloody Punch, as they draw their weapons and Peter realizes they have indeed been trained by Glory. However, another group calls him over, saying they will welcome him. Yuna tries to calm everyone down because she knows well that Peter could kill them all. At that, Jay tries to push her aside, saying it could get ugly for her too, while Yuna thinks to herself that she's trying to save them all. With that, the Dako brothers approach him, trying to figure out if he really knows how to fight or if he's just a talker. Peter simply says he knows a little while remembering that he has fought more than 1,500 times. The dude charges at him, saying this will be his last fight, but Peter manages to hit both of them simultaneously. Jem complains that this place isn't for just anyone because people don't understand what they're risking their lives for. Jem mentions that their desire is to become the world's greatest assassin, just like their idol. This idol was known as Apostle Peter. They mention that this isn't a place for a nepotist like him. After backing off, Peter says he's tired of this fight. He's had enough of one completing the other's sentences and tells them to attack together. The Dako brothers get irritated and charge at him together again, saying they'll show what their 18 years represent. Peter recalls that he has lived for 65 years and shows little interest in what they're saying. Even so, the two manage to emerge victorious, trying to show off despite being exhausted and drenched in sweat. With that, the students boast that the newcomer only fled out of fear because he couldn't react. At that moment, Peter walks through the corridors until he is approached by Yuna again. She asks if he's underestimating the volunteer club, saying he can't fool her. The girl mentions that she was watching him during that fight. It turns out that during the fight with the duo, Peter didn't use any strength to face them. Even though Peter tries to use the excuse that he always does his best, Yuna says she has proof that it's a lie, because while the two were drenched in sweat, he wasn't even tired. Yuna then pushes him against the wall, asking why he did that when he's already suspicious in the school, wanting to know what he gains by hiding his true strength. She asks what he intends to do, and Peter asks if she really wants to know what he was planning. Peter stares at her for a moment before sliding down the wall and escaping from her, saying it's lunchtime even though it's midnight. Meanwhile, in a bus parking lot, a driver was taking the opportunity to drink until the day broke. He was happy, saying he had received 1 million won just to rent the bus. But when he goes to meet the people with whom he had arranged the rental, he's surprised, thinking he would see a group. However, he only finds one man standing in the parking lot. The driver asks where the others are, and the man says it's just him while handing over a heavy suitcase. At that moment, he shows several other suitcases that need to be loaded, saying there's a lot of stuff. The driver starts loading the suitcases while getting annoyed with the absurd amount of luggage the man was planning to take. Then the man moves the driver's hand away from the suitcases, asking if he would like to make a bet. The man approaches him and asks him to try guessing what's inside those suitcases. After being startled, the driver continues the journey, remembering that he didn't accept the bet while watching the man through the rearview mirror. During the trip, the man sits calmly and serenely with his arms crossed. At the same time, the driver recalls what he saw at that moment. One of the suitcases he carried was moving. Back at the volunteer club, the teacher mentions they will have a guest, the president of the Deha group, Choi Unchang. He says he will separate the students into teams and the winner will receive a volunteer certificate with the president's recommendation. This means that the winning team would become assassins, and both Yuna and Peter recognize that this would be the best chance to get promoted. The teacher explains that their mission is a recovery one. It turns out that recently there have been many kidnappings of teenagers, and the problem involves one of those kidnapped children, because he is the only son of the group's president. One of the students wonders why this would be their mission and not a police job. The teacher explains that the reason is that the president wants revenge. He mentions that the mission is limited to rescuing the president's son and asks the students who wish to participate in the mission to raise their hands. It turns out no one raises their hands, and the teacher tries to motivate them by saying that if they don't do the mission, they will have to wait another 2 years to become assassins. Everyone believes there's something wrong with this mission until the Dako brothers volunteer for it. However, they noticed they weren't the only ones who signed up for the mission. because Peter and Yuna also volunteered, causing them to start mocking the two. When Yuna notices that Peter also volunteered, she starts complaining to him. After deciding who will go on the mission, the duo asks if they just need to go beat up the kidnappers. But then the teacher starts explaining the mission, which leaves everyone impressed. Peter recognizes that his chance to become a glory assassin again has arrived. The problem is that their mission is to have fun in a park while trying to rescue the boy. A group of dancers in carnival costumes starts passing in front of the group while being teased by the crowd. This confuses the Dako brothers, who wonder if this would be fun. While they're staring at the girls, Yuna goes to eat something, commenting that they won't stop staring at the dancers. Peter begins to have girls wanting to exchange contacts with him, while Yuna is the only one focused on their mission. She remembers that Professor Guan Yu mentioned where the president's son had been kidnapped. The goal of their mission is to rescue the hostage and defeat the kidnapper. However, she realizes that this was the last place he was seen and wonders if he's still alive. Yuna looks at Peter, thinking that maybe he could solve their problem. Our protagonist suggests they go check out a place he's curious about, and Yuna imagines that he always seems to know everything. But they can't enter the place because a reservation is required, and the staff member asks them to leave. Because of this, Hyun gets irritated and argues with the staff, attracting the attention of the people around. At that moment, Peter hears someone saying they need to download an app. After that, everyone gathers around her to check availability, and Hyun asks if she's still worried about the mission. Even so, the two brothers start playing on the kiddie rides, making a lot of noise and drawing a lot of attention, which irritates Yuna. Meanwhile, Yuna and Peter go to a shooting booth, wondering what prize they might win. The problem is that the attendant believes they'll never win anything because he added weights to the dolls while saying it was really easy to win. Yuna starts staring at the toy gun, thinking that she had never used a toy one, while the attendant imagines he could make a lot of money off her. In the end, she won all the prizes and left the attendant completely speechless. While everyone else enjoys the amusement park, Peter observes the place from a distance, until his companions call out to him, making him realize that the group was having a great time. Our protagonist imagines that this might have been the first time they'd been to an amusement park, considering what their childhoods must have been like. Because of that, he believes the best thing is to let them have as much fun as they can, since there's no telling when they might have another chance. After a while, Yuna manages to slip away from her friends, taking the opportunity to eat and think about the mission. At that moment, she notices something strange as she's able to connect to the president's son's AirPods. She realizes that he must be nearby, but she's confused because the signal is coming from the women's restroom. Yuna imagines someone might have taken his AirPods and wonders if she should call her companions. She decides to enter the restroom first to get an idea of the situation. At first, she doesn't see anything unusual, even though the AirPods signal is coming from a girl applying makeup. Afraid she might be wrong, Yuna decides to talk to the girl carefully, not revealing too much, while keeping a friendly smile. The problem is that her smile is so sinister and sadistic that the woman gets scared. At that moment, the woman's boyfriend shows up and she says that Yuna came up behind her trying to hit her. Hearing his girlfriend's comment, the guy approaches Yuna, thinking of confronting her while Yuna tries to explain what happened. He raises his hand to strike Yuna, and his girlfriend complains, saying she only wanted an apology. But he says he's going to hit her first, which makes Yuna alert to his movements. Meanwhile, the three others are wandering around the park, wondering where she could be, and Peter assumes she just went to get something to eat. Moreover, Peter says they don't need to worry about her. Because she could handle anything dangerous that might come up, Yuna uses the guy's movement to flip over him. She then grabs onto his back, threatening to shove the lollipop stick into his ear. But at that moment, she realizes she overreacted and acted on instinct, avoiding killing him. After letting go of the girl's boyfriend, she gives him her lollipop as he trembles in fear, then turns back to talk to the girl. She grabs the girl's face again and asks where she got the AirPods. Meanwhile, Peter checks his phone and doesn't notice the crowd gathering to watch him because he's so handsome. Yuna manages to reunite with the group, saying she found the AirPods and knows where they were lost. Peter says they thought of the same place and she's confused. It turns out that because the park is so crowded and lively, the kidnapper must have looked for a place where someone screaming or jumping on others would be normal. He points out that although the tickets for the haunted house showed as sold out, they hadn't seen anyone going all day. Yuna and Peter realize that the place they should be checking is the haunted house. The Dako brothers say the fun is over and they should focus more on the mission because they don't know what might happen. But Hyun keeps holding onto Yuna's clothes, irritating her as she says he claimed he would lead the way. While Hyun and Yuna argue, Peter continues staring ahead and walking forward, confused, because there was no one at the attraction. He recognizes the danger and tells them to be prepared, which confuses Hyun. Our protagonist mentions that their mission is about to begin. But at that moment, Peter realizes the true purpose of this mission. The purpose was for them to be kidnapped by the culprits to get close to the hostage. Before passing out, Hyun manages to see a man approaching them. At that moment, Professor Guan Yu bursts into the director's office, furiously demanding that he call the students. The director says he can't reach them, and Professor Guan Yu mentions that this mission wasn't so simple. He then mentions the name Park Sang-do, which makes the director concerned, because Park Sang-do was a former apostle candidate who was expelled from glory for being uncontrollable. Even so, the director mentions that there shouldn't be any problems because the students had learned enough and could handle it. However, teacher Guan Yu is frozen, sweating profusely as he recalls Sangdo's behavior. At the moment he shows something to the director is shocked. Meanwhile, in a warehouse full of suitcases, Peter and Yuna are tied up and bound to a column. Sangdo is impressed that they knew chloroform was used to knock them out. He recognized this because people knocked out by chloroform typically pass out with their mouths open, while Yuna's mouth was closed. Back with the director, he is desperate upon seeing what the professor had shown him. His mechanical leg, as he says that Sangdo is an extremely cruel person. Guan Yu complains that there's no time to be stunned, they need to save the students. Yuna notices that he had figured out she was awake and wonders what she could do. But Guan Yu warns the director that if they're discovered, Sangdo would cut off their legs while the kidnapper prepares to grab Yuna. As he's about to grab Yuna's neck, her phone starts ringing. He picks up her phone to see who's calling. When he answers, Professor Guan Yu recognizes Sangdo's voice. Taking advantage of this, Lee threatens to come after Sangdo and kill him if he dares to touch a hair on his students' heads. Sangdo remains calm, asking why so much violence. He asks if Guan Yu is afraid that he'll cripple them just like he did to the professor. This infuriates Guan Yu, while Sangdo asks if he would like to make a bet. The bet would be on how many pairs of legs would still be intact by the time he reaches the hideout. If he guessed correctly, Sangdo would spare the president's son, and ask the professor what he would like to bet if he was wrong. The director is surprised to see Guan Yu trembling with fear at the situation. With this conversation, Guan Yu becomes desperate, demanding to know where they are and trying to talk to Yuna and Peter. At that moment, he orders them to search quickly because they must have already become targets, while Sangdo warns them to hurry because he will start soon. Yuna opens her eyes and tries to see if she can talk to Peter, noticing that he was really sleeping, which irritates her because he's asleep in such a dangerous situation. She starts thinking about what can be done while taking off one of her shoes. Peter asks what she's doing as she puts her foot on his face, revealing that he wasn't even asleep. The girl says she was trying to wake him up by pinching him, and Peter teases her. After that, she starts hitting her bound wrists against her legs, saying she's using what she learned in training. But at that moment, Peter shows that he's already free and asks what she's still doing, revealing that he had freed himself some time ago. It turns out he had freed himself discreetly in case something happened. Yuna tries to explain that the kidnapper was a former member of Glory, and Peter says he already knew that. He asks if she likes making bets, which confuses Yuna. Meanwhile, the Dako brothers comment that they're in the middle of a mission and ask Sangdo to tell them where the president's son is. Sangdo recognizes their foul language and gets excited, saying he wants to make a bet with them. The two accept the idea while Guan Yu rushes desperately to that location, and Sangdo says that if they win, they can save the president's son. However, if they lose, Sangdo will cut off their legs, and Guan Yu knows that if they accept the bet, they're doomed because they have no chance of beating him. At that moment, the two get excited about the idea of fighting Sangdo, not knowing what he's really capable of. They tear their shirts and charge at him, saying they'll beat him so badly that he'll need to use a wheelchair. With that, Sangdo drops one of his knives and throws it to them, saying the best bets are the fair ones. Hyung grabs the knife, all excited, saying he's very good with knives and that Sangdo will regret giving it to him. The knife duel extends as Hyung believes he has the advantage by causing cumulative damage and can win if he just keeps pressing on in the fight. But Hyung is almost hit in the face by his own knife and starts questioning if they're the same knives. At that, he backs off, making Sangdo ask what happened. Hyung stares at the knife and realizes what's going on, and Jie asks what the problem is. It turns out the knife he received wasn't sharpened, and Sangdo looks at them with a sadistic smile. At that moment, Peter and Yuna arrive in the room to help, but Hyung tells them to stay back, which impresses Yuna. They say this fight is theirs and that the two of them can't interfere. They believe that if they can't win this fight, Yuna and Peter won't have a chance, so they must stay behind. With that, the two prepare to fight, saying that Sangdo doesn't know what their motivation to fight is. At that moment, they remember the last challenge at the orphanage, called the Hell Month. In this challenge, instead of receiving water or food, they were given only a pistol with a single bullet. Their goal was to survive amidst the wild beasts that surrounded them during this challenge. They recall that the bullet was used for various reasons, such as hunting or betraying their friends. In some cases, it was used to free themselves from that nightmare. However, the two refused to give up and tried to survive by any means. Throughout the challenge, they kept the bullet they received, because they knew that the two bullets they had would determine their fate someday. After that month ended, they discovered they were the only survivors out of 181 children from that generation of the orphanage. During that time, they heard about a boy their age who became known as Apostle Peter, who had set an incredible record. His record was being the only person to survive without using his bullet in the last 58 years. 10 years passed with the two trying to become like Peter and be the best. Hyun mentions that Sangdo was just a stone in their path at that moment. Jia charges to try to hinder Sangdo's movement while Hyun prepares to attack him. His brother uses him as a support to leap over their target and attack. He repeats that Sangdo will regret giving him a knife. But Sangdo says he's not going after his leg anymore while smiling sadistically. At that moment, Sangdo grabs Hyun's wrist, saying that maybe he should cut off his arm instead. With that, Hyun drops the knife, saying he knows he can't cut him with a blunt knife. Jake takes the knife, showing that their plan was only to stab the target. When they try to stab Sangdo's neck, he comments on their dream while Jae is shocked by what he's seeing. Sangdo destroys the knife he gave them using his own knife, asking if they really think they can become like Peter. It turns out the knife he's using is a kukri. He explains that this knife is heavier than an axe and faster than a knife, and that this perfect killing weapon is something he trained his whole life to use. The two charge at him again while trying to understand how he can wield such a heavy knife with no problem. At that moment, Sangdo attacks them, demonstrating that he's not an ordinary man. In a quick movement, he strikes all their limbs and knocks them down with no effort, making them realize that this guy is a monster. After being knocked down, they plead with their partners to run away. Yuna panics and Sangdo mentions that he won't kill them because they're just kids, but he says he will collect his reward from the two. He then prepares to cut off a leg from each of them. Meanwhile, Won-Yu continues to panic, wishing that Sangdo won't harm his students, willing to give up his other leg to save them. That scene shocks Yuna, who becomes worried that he might actually cut off their legs. At that moment, he hears someone offering to make a bet. Peter offers his arms and legs, saying he's willing to give up even his neck, which catches Sangdo's attention. This excites him and he accepts Peter's bet, acknowledging it as expected of a glory member. Once again, Sangdo hands a knife to his enemy, saying the conditions must be fair. Yuna panics, afraid that Peter might take the knife, but he refuses. Our protagonist shows a floral tray, saying that it's more than enough. Sangdo starts laughing, saying that Peter is hilarious, while Yuna goes to help her partners. Sangdo then charges at Peter, saying he won't go easy on him. When he tries to land his first strike, Peter dodges with a step back. At that moment, Sangdo starts a series of attacks and notices that Peter is using the tray as a shield, recognizing it as a good idea. However, he asks how many attacks the tray can really withstand. Meanwhile, Won-Yu is worried about what might be happening, afraid that another tragedy might occur. The tragedy he fears so much is losing everyone again to Sangdo. Won-Yu starts to remember the day Sangdo was talking to a croupier, asking her to make a bet with him. He asks if she believes he can get out of there alive or not, while saying she should bet all her chips on his survival. At that moment, he was surrounded by men holding chainsaws with a betting table damaged from the fight. The leader of the assassins explains that Sangdo was causing so many problems for the company, and that's why he needed to be stopped. They mention that he had been fired, and Won-Yu remembers that this team was composed of veteran B-rank assassins. Regardless of skill and experience, it shouldn't have been possible to face 5 assassins of that level. Yet Sangdo was displaying abilities that seemed beyond human capability as he cut through the assassin's hands as if they were nothing. Won-Yu recalls that it was at that moment when he lost his leg and became useless as an assassin. No matter what weapon was the strongest, what really mattered was how monstrous Sangdo was. And then he landed a strike that cut Peter's tray in half. Sangdo acknowledges that Peter had a lot of luck and asks what happened. Peter stares at the tray while Sangdo remarks that Peter's shield was split in half. Yuna considers intervening in the fight, while Peter mentions that Sangdo had said the knife was a kukri. Our protagonist comments that this knife wasn't made to be used so ferociously and is impressed by his aggressiveness. Then Peter crushes the pieces of the tray and Yuna is amazed to realize that the tray wasn't a shield. Now that it was cut in half, Peter could use the 2 pieces as weapons. While Sangdo tries to appear unconcerned, he realizes that none of this was a coincidence, as it wasn't the first time this had happened. Because when he believed he had cut through the tray in Peter's head, Peter had managed to dodge the attack. Sangdo wonders if he really is a student, saying he doesn't know where Peter learned those tricks. But he admits that it won't work on him, as he throws his coat at Peter to distract him. Using the coat to obscure Peter's vision, Sangdo charges at him. He then executes a series of cuts to finish Peter off. This time, he believes he managed to cut him and notices that Peter was just an ordinary boy, until he sees Peter appear behind him, trying to strike him with a piece of the tray. Sangdo then realizes that he had actually cut through a pillow. Just before being hit by Peter's attack, he manages to back away by taking steps backward. Sangdo understands that Peter's intention was to strike his carotid artery to kill him, and that he only managed to protect himself by using his hand. He asks if Peter is really a student while taking a battle stance. At that moment, he understands that the tray wouldn't cut through thick clothing or block his knife. So Peter's plan was to target his neck, and then he charges at him. Peter initiates a series of rapid attacks that Sangdo can't fully keep up with. Sangdo stops wondering if Peter is a student and starts questioning if his enemy is even human. Yuna understands that the kukri's movement destroys everything around it when swung, and if Peter were hit, he would die. But she also notices that Sangdo is much slower than the protagonist. This was caused by the weight of his weapon, and if the fight dragged on too long, Peter would win. However, Peter is slightly hit on the face, which worries Yuna. Sangdo mentions that to kill cattle, he needs the right tool and then pulls out another knife. He reveals that there were knives hidden inside the kukris. Peter remembers that Sangdo's kukri weighed 3 times more than a regular knife. By getting rid of it, Sangdo's speed was no longer affected and Peter loses his advantage. With that, Sangdo begins a series of attacks that Peter must defend against using his improvised weapons. Yuna notices the change in Sangdo after he got rid of the kukris. but she also realizes that those knives were designed for stabbing and wonders why he's using them in this way. Sangdo looks to land a direct strike to finally end the fight. When he's just inches away from striking Peter's neck, his hand locks up and opens. His hand drops the knife and he is shocked by this. Peter asks if he couldn't put any strength into his hand after seeing the knife fall. At that moment, Sangdo realizes what Peter's plan was all along. It turns out that Peter's target wasn't his neck. His goal was to hit Sangdo's hands, and then Sangdo notices his hand completely cut and covered in blood. Our protagonist starts talking about the muscles and nerves in the hands, explaining that they are necessary to hold something. What Peter did was cut each one of them using the weapons. He explains that from the beginning, he had no intention of killing Sangdo. Sangdo begins trembling, incredulous at what just happened. That realization made Sangdo understand that his enemy was no ordinary student, and he wonders how many men that boy had killed so far. Peter mentions that he had warned him that there was no way to win against an iron knife with a silver tray. With that, he wraps the tray around his hand, saying he would show how a rock can be shattered with a simple egg. Sangdo begins to remember his terrible past, being bullied by thugs who hung him upside down from a tree. Every day, he imagined getting revenge on the bullies, but he never had the strength to fight back against them, until one day, they threw 2 dogs at him. The bullies said that if he could beat the dogs, he would stop bullying him, while Sangdo cowered in fear, wishing to die. At that moment, the bully asked if he wanted to make a bet, and this affected him deeply. Hearing that phrase, Sangdo began to get up, mentioning that his legs started to move on their own. He couldn't explain how he managed to advance against the bully and punch him directly in the face, but he understood that betting his life made him stronger as he killed the bully. From that point on, all his fights followed the idea of betting his life to feel powerful. Gradually, these bets became his addiction. That's because he always won his bets, being the strongest of all. But at that moment, he ends up being hit by Peter's fist, wrapped with the tray like a glove. With that, he's thrown to the ground while Peter discards his metal glove. Yuman is impressed by the fight and Peter charges at Sangdo, who becomes desperate to keep him at a distance. At that moment, Sangdo pulls out a grenade and orders Peter to kneel. Otherwise, he plans to blow up the entire place, pointing the grenade at the suitcases. Sangdo reveals that he had put the kidnapped children inside the suitcases, including President Choi's son. The girl is shocked by his actions, imagining that if he detonated the grenade, everyone would die. The kidnapper mentions that there's a gas pipe in the ceiling that would kill everyone if it exploded. He then orders Peter to kneel again, and Peter tells him to go ahead and try to detonate it. Peter grabs the grenade and shoves it into Sangdo's mouth before he even realizes it. He then explains how a grenade works, saying that Sangdo can't open his mouth or he'll die. After pulling the pin from the grenade, Peter clenches his fists, saying that this is what a real threat looks like. Our protagonist takes the opportunity to beat Sangdo while he has the grenade in his mouth. Afterward, Peter puts the pin back in and tells Sangdo to stop crying and get up. Peter mentions that he's not done yet as he holds the grenade he took from Sangdo's mouth. Sangdo says he didn't want to resort to desperate measures as he tries to get up. Yuna once again worries about what the kidnapper's next move might be. But at that moment, Sangdo kneels down crying, begging them to call it a draw. He promises to pretend that he never fought them and would release all the children as long as they end the fight right there. Finally, Guan Yu arrives at the kidnapper's hideout, worried about his students. But he's greeted by a completely destroyed Sangdo, nowhere near the terrible man he once was. Peter appears, supporting his colleagues while Yuna stands beside him, smiling slightly. With that, the incident was resolved and the kidnapped children were successfully rescued. Meanwhile, Sangdo is placed in a black bag, complaining and asking them to say it was a draw. He is then taken to the Glory headquarters and Guan Yu's nightmare finally ends. Peter's group gathers, with the Dako brothers boasting about their teamwork. While Guan Yu wonders what might have happened, Peter tells Yuna to cover up properly to avoid catching a cold. Sometime later, they are promoted to D-rank assassins. But this leaves the Dako brothers furious for not getting a higher rank, and Yuna gets annoyed with them. They take the elevator, descending several floors until they begin to worry about how much further they will keep going down. When the elevator doors open, they are met by 2 enormous women, causing the brothers to believe they are going to die. They try to close the doors, saying they'll come back another time. But then a beautiful woman appears between the two, welcoming the group. With that, they change their minds, saying they are the guests that were expected. The woman asks them to follow her as she guides them through the place. She explains that the president is interested in them for saving the life of his son, who is the heir to the Dana group. She then leads them to a dining room, saying that the president has ordered them to be well taken care of. After that, she takes them to get changed, and the group is given suits. While waiting, the brothers simulate boastful conversations with others, saying they know the president. The girl opens the door to continue their way, making everyone excited. She explains that the main event would be beyond this door. The room was filled with weapons, and the girl explains that the Dana group is responsible for supplying armaments to the Glory Assassins. As a reward for the rescue, the president decided to give them as many weapons as they desired. The brothers wonder if they really need firearms. However, since they're being given for free, they decide to take as many as they can. Yuna gets excited about the models of knives they have and that she could take as many as she wanted. But as soon as she reaches out to grab them, she remembers that she didn't do anything that day and doesn't believe she has the right to take anything. The girl asks if anything caught Peter's attention, trying to figure out what he might choose. Peter simply picks up a fountain pen, saying it's all he needs, especially since he's used everything in that arsenal before. At that moment, she receives a message from the president saying that he would like them to be brought to his office, which makes the brothers complain about how long he's taking. But then she corrects her statement, saying that the president asked for only Peter to be escorted to his office, which irritates Hyun, since they fought so much for him. So Peter goes up in the elevator alone with the girl, who comments on the pen he chose, and Peter mentions that he likes using that model. However, she recalls that the model was released 40 years ago and was discontinued early, forcing Peter to improvise, saying it was a gift from his grandfather. When the girl thinks about asking if he came from the orphanage, Peter changes the subject, asking about the president and why he was the only one called. Finally, they arrive at the president's office, and the girl mentions that she has brought the protagonist as requested. With that, Peter meets President Choi Uncheng. He asks if Peter liked the rewards, and Peter simply thanks him for everything. Our protagonist asks what Choi wanted with him, and the answer is that he just wanted to meet him. But then he gets closer, saying that he did have a reason to want to bring Peter to his office. Choi mentions that he knows who Peter really is, which worries the protagonist. Approaching Kim Sung-gu, the man examines him closely and says that, in a way he can't quite explain, he looks a lot like Peter, a comparison that in fact is not unusual. A faint smile escaped his face. On Christmas Eve of 1978 in Namsan, electricity surged through the head of an unsuspecting man. The men want him to reveal the whereabouts of Choi Uncheng, but he refuses to give any sense of information. He had already endured a lot and still did not intend to give in. After smiling, he said that he had already told them the way they had to go to save the boy. They from Korea would have to hand over their missiles to the Soviet Union. This is the only way. Refusal necessarily implies the permanent disappearance of the boy, who would be killed by someone. The president of the company feels unwell upon hearing this, but learned that the United States is sending its best prepared troops to Moscow to rescue the boy. On the phone, a boy is speaking to someone. An armed man is outside the train. He is pointing his gun at a helicopter in the sky. The aircraft explodes into several pieces, lighting up the night sky. The Delta team had been eliminated, and the company president is losing hope. So he decided to go to the Church of Honor. Someone is calling for the priest outside repeatedly. It is Choi Dae-ha, and he says it is an urgent matter. The priest wants to know why the confession is so late, and he then says that his son has been kidnapped by the Russians. With this, the Daega group would give him the necessary support for 10 years or even 100 years if he wished. He only asks that among the 12 disciples he has trained, the best one be sent for this task. However, the priest says he does not understand what he is talking about. Once again, he says that his son has been kidnapped, and the priest tells him not to worry, for God's will shall be done. He only needs to say his prayers, but the man says he needs more than just prayers now. God's missile had already landed in Moscow. Faced with this, the man doubts, as 3 well-prepared teams have been obliterated, and 1 man alone seems insufficient. But he does not know who this man is. For even alone, he is more than enough, because his son is the strongest of them all. On the train, the Russians want to know how he got there and if he is alone. In Russian, he tells them that he is alone. Even they don't believe it. Without further delay, the shootout begins as if they were in a slum. One of the Russians tries to hit the intruder with his pistol. However, his agility is such that he passed through the carriage, taking lives with his physical integrity completely intact. He said that their head count matches perfectly, with the number of bullets left in his pistol. Opening the carriage door, a man shouts for him to drop the weapon immediately. If he doesn't do it, the boy's brains will be splattered all over the carriage wall. He had heard of this guy before, the only one left alive wherever he goes, and he didn't expect him to be so young. This is him, the disciple Peter. Now in Korean, he speaks to the boy who is being held hostage. As soon as he counts to 3, he should duck. The boy didn't understand at first. The countdown starts, and the Russian becomes apprehensive about their communication. Halfway through, he orders the intruder to kneel. The countdown ends, and he threatens to kill the boy. With that, the coin was thrown with brutal force. The boy managed to duck, while his captor was fatally struck by the coin. In Russian, he apologizes to the KGB agent and bids him farewell. Terrified, the boy thanks his savior. Asking if he is Korean too, he said he would never forget this kindness. In fact, he would repay him for what was done. Placing a hat on the boy's head, he said he wasn't there to save him. He was there to ensure the future of the Daha group, and if he understands that, he should stand up immediately. Because they had a long way to go before they reached home. The boy thought the guy was really cool. 40 years after the incident, he hasn't forgotten the face of his savior because he is only alive today thanks to him. Looking at the boy, he asks if that's correct and calls him Peter once again, and says that he must certainly be a relative, a grandfather, for the resemblance is very strong. It's been a while since someone made him feel so scared like this, however. That fragile boy he once saved had turned into a very bold man. I heard that he chose only a pen among the armaments, and the young man says that it's enough for him. But he can't let that man's grandson leave like this. It's a modest gift, but he hopes it will be accepted. A long time ago, his grandfather used something similar to save his life. It is the pinnacle of this company's technology, the St. Petrus V4. Its engine is powerful and it reaches over 500 kilometers per hour unofficially. It has a stealth function with a signal blocker, and with it, there's no need to worry about GPS or anything of the sort. I sold the motorcycle, he says, asking if that was really necessary. The other two talk, exchanging subtle barbs. They ask the woman if they could exchange all the weapons they had taken, but she refused. A helmet is thrown into his hands and he asks what she's waiting for. He should hurry and get on the bike, and the other guy says he should be the one to drive it. There's a call from Professor Guan Yu on the phone. Answer it. He asks if his student managed to have some fun. People from Glory want to speak to him, and he assumes it's a meeting of assassins, wanting to know more about the newcomers who are already well employed. This made them a bit suspicious. They didn't like being called newcomers in the business. They are dedicated rookies, and they follow the motorcycle with their electric scooters, which are too slow. At the end of the call, the professor told them to go and show everyone that the rookie is a monster and is here to stay. Being popular is tiring, and indeed, they are curious about them because they assume they were ranked S. He wants to know if Yumet is ready, but he thinks the other two are too impatient. The door in front of them is still closed. It was time for them to go inside. Yuna is impressed by everything she is seeing now. She didn't expect that this was the place where the revelations are received. Revelations are the missions that Glory's assassins receive based on their rankings. Simply put, it's where they receive their revelations. In the center of the church, the faithful line up to receive the host. Attached to the small piece of bread is a note with the mission details. Low-ranking assassins receive their missions this way. The two fools are curious to know what ranking they received. However, they don't understand the message. Behind the bread, it just says, fight. This is their first time and they don't give missions to rookies. One of them thinks they weren't recognized, and the other says that if they were, they would have received something. For rookies, they are given a little of the new blood, which at first glance smells really good. Thus, the content of the chalice is poured over one of their heads. The priest asks if he liked it and if it tasted good. They were already expecting these two Class D buffoons. They're just two idiots who can't tell the difference between chocolate and poop. Irritated, he asks if the priest is one of them. It doesn't take long for the assassins to gather in the center of the church. Stretching, they are preparing to beat them up, and they won't go easy just because some of them are elderly who rely too much on the ranking classification. Trying to intimidate them, they say that the fools have no idea what it really means to be Class D, and of course they have no idea at all. Delivering the first kick, he says they weren't born to be Class D. They should remember the Dako brothers who will become rank as disciples. Now it's time for them to stop wasting time. The priest needs to defend himself, and they begin to praise the boys who weren't intimidated in front of the seniors. The girl is impressed with the progress of the brothers, who seem much more confident. One of the assassins is preparing to retaliate now. The smaller one had disappeared from his field of vision. Then one of his legs is suddenly grabbed. One of the brothers is now holding that man. With him immobilized, he shouted for his brother to act quickly. This is the perfect opportunity for him to use all his physical prowess. While blood drips on his face, they ask him if he dreamed of being like Peter, because he did the same thing when he was their age, but now he needs to show them the real world. And he will also stop wasting time now. The two just watch as the screams echo in the air. He is worried about Ja. However, his face is already being punched before he could react. Yuna shouts for them to stop. Then an assassin stops behind them and asks how it feels to see the real world. His director Jang ranked B. That old man trained his whole life to reach rank B, and those who achieve it are known to be special. Rank D only targets regular people. They are a total of 336. The C rankers deal with mafias and similar groups, and there are 200 in this category. Those in the B rank encounter other assassins in their missions, with a total of 100. In A rank, the jobs have a national impact, and there are only 36 people at this level. As long as you're an assassin, you must hold your knife until death. You must give your all until you're vomiting your own blood. To reach A rank, a lifetime of dedication is required, however. Effort alone won't take you to the top. At the top are the 12 disciples. They stand above everyone else. Already beaten down, the old man asks if the boy wants to know how to become a disciple, but he doesn't understand what the old man is trying to say. Continuing the beating, he says that one needs to be reborn. Once again, his face is smashed into the ground due to the blows. Then he asks if he has any idea how arrogant he is, and that if he wasn't an orphan, he should go back to his mother's lap. Yuma is still terrified by the scene and tries to intervene. And the director says she should be grateful for being D rank, as she has no skills to be an assassin. But if she does half of what her former boss did, maybe she could buy medicine, and then his hand is grabbed by someone. The young man tells the senior not to cross the line, and he doesn't know who this boy is. Irritated by what just happened, he asks if the boy wants to fight him, to which the boy remains silent. Then he remembered when he defeated Park Sang-do. Because he is talented, it's only a matter of time before Glory suspects him, and everyone would be at risk because of it. And to take down these guys, he needs to hide behind the image of being a mere D rank. The director slaps his face, saying that he's too arrogant while adults are talking. Continuing to hit him, he says that he just wants to appear strong in front of the woman beside him. Then he told the director that he could hit him as much as he wanted, and the director paused to listen. But he didn't say anything more after that. All he wants is to take the other two to the hospital, because one is unconscious and the other has a deep wound and their lives are at risk. You don't speak of the disciples, he learned this well, so he asked please. Hearing this, the director lost his motivation and said that they were done there. However, he extended his hand to the boy, asking him to give up his volunteer license. He looks at the director without showing any reaction. He should come back to get it when he's grown and strong. Thus, the four are outside the church. The most beaten among them asks what that was all about. They don't know what to say to the teacher when he learns that they lost their licenses. Then he apologized to Yuna, Kim, and Sungo because they couldn't protect them. But it was good that they didn't get involved. Otherwise, the situation would have gotten worse. As the leader, he wants to show them only the cool side of life. With a helmet placed on his head, someone calls the leader to go, because it was time for them to get something to eat. At least that managed to cheer them up a bit. On the highway, the motorcycle makes its way. Yuna is riding at the back. There are a few questions she would like to ask Kim. She wants to know what she could do to become stronger. In response, he tells Yuna not to ask him stupid questions and wants to know the reason why she desires this, but Yuna says she's just asking. Continuing, she wants to know if Kim is okay, but he wants to know in what sense. All of their licenses were confiscated at the church, but Kim says that if you're weak, things get taken away, and Yuna didn't like this response, yet doesn't change the fact that they're weak. On the back seat, Yuna holds him tighter and tighter. Everything that happened at the church was too complicated. Then she clutches Kim's jacket, feeling desolate. He continues looking at the road ahead of him. This situation was too annoying to deal with. At night, thinking about it is refreshing. Fighting for their place against idiots is too boring. If anything, they can find another job, but among them, there was something special. Without knowing exactly what, the director says it was the one who was with the woman. His gaze was especially violent, and he realizes that there's a man there. And this man says that the boy won't be able to become a man now. They want to know if he came back to take more hits, but he says nothing, and they ask if he ignored them on purpose. Kim wants to know what they really intend to take this matter so far. For the director, the boy hadn't been beaten enough, so he was going to teach him a lesson, but Kim interrupted because he was there to show them something. Skills they had never seen before and would never see again, the skills of a rank S disciple. For now, they still don't understand what's happening inside the church. So he asked the boy if he had mentioned anything about the skills of a disciple. He then began to laugh uncontrollably, as he's been in the business for 14 years and has never seen one. The boy doesn't know how the world works, so they are going to beat him up and send him away to reflect a little. But when he looked at his friend, he was met with the unexpected. He's standing in the same place, completely still. There's no expression on his face. In front of him stands a high school student who's ranked D, whose name they don't even remember. Not only is he unarmed, but he's carrying only a rosary that doesn't even serve as a weapon, and there are many openings in his stance. Feeling apprehensive, he doesn't know what to do in front of this boy. Those eyes definitely don't match the information he has on him. His friend asks if he's really afraid of a mere child, then John diverts the conversation, saying that's not the case. He's just a young man with a different look. It's not logical to hesitate before him. There's an unspoken rule. Inferiors who rebel against superiors allow the latter to be justified in correcting them. Execution is the right thing to do, so he threw the book towards the boy, expecting a reaction. He already anticipated that one of the arms would be used to block the object. This way, his ribs would be exposed to a surprise attack that would naturally cause him to bend over in pain. Despite all that planning, the boy's ribs weren't his target. What he truly aimed for was to reach his eyes. Now it's the end. Before he could deliver his fatal blow, the rosary beads inexplicably flew through the air. He still doesn't know what happened, but his hands aren't where they should be. That thing in his hands wasn't an ordinary rosary. While contemplating what happened, the rosary's thread is nearly wrapping around his neck. Its thickness is so thin that it's almost imperceptible to the eyes. In the back of the church, various objects begin to shatter. Around them, the pews are being destroyed without any apparent cause. Everything is happening too fast, and he still can't grasp what's going on. Indeed, there won't be time for him to understand what happened, as his head is asking for a divorce from his body. It was almost a hallucination for him. Terrified, he puts his hands around his neck to ensure that his head is in the right place. Then he's scolded by his colleague, who said that Jong was too distracted at a crucial moment. But it wasn't just distraction in his head. He was utterly terrified. Looking at the young man, he knows he can't do anything against him, because in his mind he's already died thousands of times trying to attack him. With nothing happening so far, the three of them are staring at each other in the church. With his years of experience, he learned one thing. He can sense if he's capable of defeating his opponent before the fight even begins. Even so, he had never felt that before. That boy is simply terrifying. He's on a completely different level than anything he's ever seen in his life. Never in his imagination did he conceive of someone with that kind of murderous aura. Remembering the slaps he gave him earlier, he doesn't know what to do. He'd rather die than face the consequences of that. Still lost in his thoughts, Kim looks at them without any hurry. However, he had approached Jung, who unexpectedly says that he was wrong. He desperately begs for forgiveness, admitting he was wrong to behave that way. However, Kim just gives him a few pats on the face. He said to him that the ability to sense the presence of death is a fundamental knowledge for an assassin. Saying this, he leaves as he knows Jung learned an important lesson that day. Even though he's gone, inside the church, Jung's friend asks what he had done, because he must be crazy to have allowed that to happen. Outside, a woman says he shouldn't have gone, as he could be discovered if he fought with someone. But Kim says that's not going to happen and that she should think about it. The rank B assassin lost to a rank D rookie. He won't be able to continue in this business. Losing like that to a rookie, who is still almost a kid, she wants to know if she would be able to talk about it if she were in his place. Jiwon only went there because she was worried. She just wanted him to stay quiet and not make her hate him. Kim revs his motorcycle a few times and speeds down the highway, leaving the place behind. The man is furious that they lost their identifications as they are their lifeline. That's what the brothers are thinking, and are sure they're in serious trouble. Various thoughts are running through the heads of the two who don't know how to explain what happened or if they should even talk about it. Someone calls them, pulling them out of their sad moment of reflection. It's the assassin from the previous day standing there. The two are terrified, even thinking he's a ghost. Scared, they want to know if he came there to beat them up, and he tells them not to call him sir because they're not in the army. He just came there to return their identifications. The brothers start celebrating so much that Jung asks if they want to die. But the truth is, being there, he can only notice that peculiar boy. That one is definitely a very strange citizen. The brothers keep thanking Jung, who asks them to at least be more discreet. Holding Yuna's identification in his hand, he thinks of returning it to her as soon as possible. After all, he hadn't seen her yet. Meanwhile, the brothers brag about what happened. In the training room, someone is struggling with their own effort. It's Yuna, relentlessly striking the dummy. A fight involving one of the brothers flashes through her memory. Her opponent was much more experienced. There was nothing she could do to help. The same thing happened inside the church. She just watched the action unfold. It's been bothering her a lot. She doesn't want to feel useless. Furious, she plunged her knife into the training dummy's neck. Thinking about what happened, she feels pathetic for not being able to do anything. If she continues like this, her younger brother Yujin will be in danger. Entering the room unnoticed, Kim asks what is so pathetic that Yuna is talking about. Before she can answer, he says he came there to deliver her license. But Yuna says it's okay, she doesn't have the right to have that. Kim wants to know if she said that because of her younger brother. She says she is pathetic, but still tries to be an assassin, something she has no potential to do, and Yuna yells at him to shut up. He always talks as if he knows everything, and Kim apologizes, then Yuna tells him not to talk about things if he knows nothing. However, he did know something about her brother. They aren't biological siblings, and Yuna wants to know how he found that out. Actually, Kim wants to know what happened to her brother. Yuna looks at him as memories start surfacing. Her little brother wants to go on one of the rides at the park with her because they're family. But she doesn't agree with that statement. They are relatives. She told the boy to go away as they aren't real siblings. From the day he was born and abandoned at the subway, he had no family. He didn't die only because he was taken to an orphanage. There were many things lacking, but they weren't miserable. Growing up alone, she didn't have the courage to make friends or build a family. The truth is, she didn't want to go through the experience of being abandoned again. Being alone is good, that's what she thought every day. However, she wanted to die soon, and that almost happened to her. During one of her missions, she was hit, and they were struggling to stop the bleeding. Not knowing what to do with her, as there were no proper treatment facilities, they said they could just dispose of the dying body. And since resources were scarce, it wouldn't be a complete loss. Maybe it would have been better if she had died right at the beginning of her life. She knew what kind of place that was, she just wished that day had come sooner. Even so, she carries no regrets. Unexpectedly, she woke up. The doctor said a miracle had happened. After that miracle, Lee Yujin had disappeared from her life. That boy was really insubordinate. The teacher tried to stop him, but his efforts were in vain. That boy said he needed to save his sister, and it would be fine if he died. Lying on a stretcher, he asks if his sister is safe now. She swore that because of her life, she had no family at all, but he was there every moment taking care of her. This moved the girl deeply, as she didn't want Lee Yujin to put himself at risk for her to be saved. The man says that a bag of blood costs a lot of money, and the boy is draining all of their reserves. They wanted to throw the boy away and stop his treatment. Yuna had just bumped into them and asked the doctor not to throw the boy away. She was already feeling better and said she could pay the hospital bill with her own work. No matter how much it costs, she is his sister and needs to do this. It was the first time she had a reason to live. Remembering this, she says it doesn't matter if they aren't biological siblings or if they are a bit different. Yuna is willing to do anything to save him. Kim said he had meddled in her affairs carelessly, so he was going to leave so that she could finish her training, but there's something Yuna wants to tell him. He is the strongest person she has ever seen in her life. Stretching out her hand, she tried to grab the sleeve of his jacket. It's not time for him to leave yet. Looking at him, Yuna asks for help so that she can become stronger. That wasn't just a request. She was truly begging him to help her. It was everything she desired the most, and she was waiting for Kim's reaction. It didn't take long for her to regret the request and feel ashamed of saying those things. She thought of many things and tried to retract her words after asking for help. Then she pointed at Kim and called him teacher, saying he would be her mentor. Even so, he still didn't show any reaction. Faced with this, she wants to know if that's how she should be asking for favors, and Yuna wonders if she needs to be more sincere than that. She quickly responds, saying she's getting by just fine without help, and Kim says he was considering the possibility of accepting her as a student. Yuna quickly approached him, asking if the teacher had called her, and Kim says that imagining her as an apprentice is horrible. Then he tells her that she is weak, with a mediocre body, easily frightened, and with a terrible temper, all traits an assassin shouldn't have. But there was something in her that could be developed. For Kim, Yuna has the best eyes an assassin could ever wish for. Since the incident at the restaurant, she had shown something different, even amidst the chaos of that day, or during the fight against the brothers. In every tense moment, whether it was inside the assassin's church, Yuna was there with them. During every conflict in which she was present, her eyes never strayed from the fight, no matter the circumstances, as if she was trying to absorb all the techniques she was seeing. Her visual acuity is far greater than that of ordinary people, and upon hearing this, Yuna felt embarrassed by the compliment. For Kim, he was merely stating the truth, but there is something that could help the girl in her quest for strength. A weapon that could turn her disadvantages into her greatest asset, one that she could use to defeat anyone. And he threw the weapon to her. If she learned to master it, she wouldn't even need a teacher. That object would turn her into a true assassin. Looking at the item in her hands, she couldn't believe its potential. Someone is sniffing money and says that it's very valuable. The brothers are quite pleased with the weekly payment and want to know how much a disciple earns, while Kim thinks that disciples don't care about money, because they can have whatever they want. With money in hand, they argue about what they should buy first. Kim wants to know where Yuma is because he hasn't seen her, and he hears that she went to her part-time job. She's had it for a few weeks now and must be cleaning around this time. She cleans up what the assassins leave behind. It's a job that requires a strong stomach because there are always disgusting things left. Even though she's an assassin with a weekly salary, she continues to do it. They have no idea why she does all of this, while Yuna looks at her brother's picture. They assume it must be to pay for her food because the girl eats a lot, but she eats so much at the cafeteria because the food there is free, and she does it to save money. The fool says that to be successful, one must spend a lot and advise Kim to heed his wise words. He completely ignores them because he thinks Yuna must be doing it for some reason and probably hides it even from her brother. Looking at the phone, they notice that Yuna just sent a message. She asked for a scarf, but the weather is too hot to wear such a piece of clothing. Inside a warehouse, the temperature is quite different from outside. In the place, the brothers feel firsthand how cold it is. Yuna called them to go there just to deliver the scarf to her. She says they complain too much and just want to hand over the item quickly to get out of there. They ask if she's working, and if so, she must be earning well, but Yuna says that she's training. If that's the case, they ask if she's breaking those ice blocks with punches. Indeed, she's breaking them, but with that small object. One who gave it to her was Kim himself. It's a rope dart, an extremely uncommon weapon. Yuna is a bit skeptical that it will help her become a real assassin. A traditional wushu weapon, the rope is tied around the body, and the dart is thrown towards the enemy. A strong, fast, and extremely unpredictable weapon. The brothers make fun of her, saying that if she's going to use that, the idiot might as well use a firearm. Indeed, the dart is strong, but compared to a firearm, it's just a toy, because every shot from a gun is a guaranteed kill. Hearing the criticism, she says the guys are not wrong. Kim says that to kill 5 people, 5 shots are needed, but with that, it's different. Then Yuna shows them what the dart is capable of. The brothers watch, completely in disbelief. In Yuna's hands, the dart is becoming a devastating weapon. With just one throw, she managed to break much more than just an ice block. That should have been impossible, and they think Yuna might have just gotten lucky with her throw. Discreetly, they start looking up the weapon on the internet, and the girl tells them they need to be less obvious. Outside, the day goes by. The owner of the place is a D-rank assassin, Park Bingsu, and he asks if everything went well. Yuna says yes, and that she'll leave as soon as she cleans up everything. But he says she doesn't need to clean anything, but wants to know if she's really Lee Yuna. He says he has seen many people there breaking ice as training, but destroying it like she did was the first time in his entire life. She tries to apologize, but the man says it's not necessary. Yuna tries to pay the man for the ice she destroyed, but he says it's not necessary either. A few hours ago, a friend of hers came by and paid for the ice, giving him $1,000,000. She didn't expect that. This is the value of their weekly salary. He also gave him an item to deliver to Yuna, an ointment for burns, and the friend said for her to apply it on her hands so she doesn't get hurt. Indeed, it was a great concern shown for her. With the conversation over, there was nothing more to do at the place. Yuna leaves the ice storage. Looking at her phone, she doesn't know how to thank Kim for everything. The more she tries to think of something, the less confident she becomes. Since that's the situation, she called him and Kim answered, asking what's going on. Not knowing what to say, she asked what was for lunch that day. He says she's annoying, but mentioned that it was her favorite, and as soon as she hears it, Yuna says goodbye. However, before the call ends, Kim congratulates her for training with a real weapon, and says they'll see each other soon. In the background, the brothers are trying to master the rope dart without success. Kim wonders if Yuna knows that the strength and weapon she's perfecting have been within her reach for a long time because she was a gymnast. Inside a room, someone is being beaten. A degenerate screams among them, asking them to face him all at once because he is Park Sango. A truckload of B and C rankers isn't enough to contain him as they are nothing compared to him. And things were already becoming boring. Indeed, to take down Park, who is an A rank, none of them would be able to do it. So it's necessary for a disciple to appear and solve the situation. As he enters the place, the living assassins bow before him. Park watches him, unsure of what to make of it. As soon as the man approaches him, he lets his mash sheet fall to the ground. The disciple picks it up, saying he'd heard that the man likes to gamble and wants them to make a bet together. He'd returned the math sheet to Park Sang-do and says that he was already close to becoming a disciple. The man wants to know if he could win a fight against a real disciple. In his eyes, the intimidating figure of a formidable assassin is reflected. That is Nathaniel. A child is thrashing on the ground because she hates all types of kneels. The brothers say she's weak and will have a long way to go until adulthood. The truth is, just like the child, they are also terrified of hospital environments. They start complaining that the nurse is taking too much blood and that they are not donating. But Kim knows that when one becomes an assassin, it's necessary to undergo several tests at the Divine Honor Hospital, managed by Glory. When asked about his year of birth, he almost made a mistake by 40 years. Everything is going well, there's only one thing that worries him. And that thing is the blood collection. It's time for him to do it. The reason they collect blood is very simple. They're marking the assassins because DNA and fingerprints don't change over time. Those who betray and abandon the organization are found this way. It's only a matter of time before Kim's DNA and Peter's DNA are identical. In other words, what's going to happen is the complete exposure of his true identity. Looking closely, the woman wants him to say what he did that day. But Kim has already told her everything. He had his blood collected at the hospital. She starts slapping the boy, saying that because of his old man, she's going to end up dying. As if it wasn't enough to fight a rank B, now they might discover that he's actually Peter. This wasn't good, and the woman wants to know if he wants to die that badly. But he doesn't want to sit idle, and has a plan to make them get confused during the chase. Full of confidence, he says he's going to blow up the hospital. Once again, Ji-won starts hitting him because she thought the idea was completely idiotic. She said he's gone crazy for not being older and the hospital is huge, but he's aware of the difficulties. Moreover, it's the place where Glory keeps valuable treasures. The Divine Honor Hospital is much more than it appears to be. It's one of the largest in all of Korea, and it looks ordinary from the outside. Inside, they disguise murders as accidental deaths. They hide bodies and dispose of injured assassins. It's a hospital made by assassins for assassins. Now this DNA is in the hospital's data center. There's no other choice but to blow up the place. Accepting the idea, the woman asks if he knows who is protecting the hospital now. The one in charge is the disciple Nathaniel. This guy is so bizarre that he might not even be human. Inside the room, someone is doing their research. That codename, Nathaniel, has a reason to be. His social role is that of a doctor. Even though he's talented, he got involved in a problem and had to go into hiding. 4 years ago in Rio de Janeiro, a policeman was patrolling near a community, but he ended up seeing something unusual for the region. In front of the precinct, someone had hung clothes out to dry. Only upon getting closer did he realize what it was. So great was his shock that he crashed the patrol car he was driving. Those were bodies all belonging to the leaders of the gangs in the state of Rio de Janeiro. This triggered a war operation aimed at wiping out the remaining members. Before they entered the place, they smelled gunpowder as if a conflict had just occurred. The officer in the lead asked them to stop the infiltration. All that was there was blood and twisted weapons. There were no bodies. More importantly, the scene didn't even seem like it was done by humans. It was unexpected, and they should report it to their superiors. While talking, the officer saw someone approaching the sergeant. The terrifying hand was already within the officer's reach. He had been captured, and they immediately thought they were caught in an ambush. They immediately called for reinforcements, but he could only hear the cries for help from his colleague. It didn't take long for there to be only puddles of blood on the ground. Frightened, the officer asked about his friend. He has no idea what kind of monster could be behind that door. A terrifying voice came from within, asking for more victims. An object was thrown in his direction. It was the boot of his colleague who had been there. Looking at the shoe, he still didn't understand the situation, but he was certainly terrified by all of it. In front of him was the assassin, and on the ceiling, his victims were hanging by their heads. He only desires more victims, preferably some that are more resilient.
The video ends here. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Killer Peter, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Wait for the next part. See you in the next video. Take care.